The nod that shook the NBA, one tiny nod. That was all it took to send the entire basketball world into chaos. The moment the Washington Wizards secured the #1 pick in the 2026 NBA draft, cameras instantly locked onto AJ Dybansa, the future face of basketball. The player scouts have been obsessing over for years. The kid many people believe could become the next true NBA superstar. And what did he do? Nothing. No smile, no excitement, no celebration, no emotional reaction at all. Just a slow, cold, almost uncomfortable nod. Within minutes, social media exploded. NBA fans were posting the clip everywhere, trying to decode every movement on his face like it was some kind of secret message. Some fans joked that AJ looked like he had just watched his future disappear in real time. Others went even further, saying the Wizards had just ended the career of the most hyped prospect in basketball before he even played a single NBA game. And honestly, the reaction was brutal. One viral comment completely took over NBA Twitter. Bro already knows his rookie contract is going to be wasted. Another fan posted, "That's the face of a man realizing he's about to spend the next 5 years losing basketball games." But here's the crazy part. AJ Dybansa never actually said anything negative about Washington. Not once. That's what makes this story so dangerous. Because sometimes silence says more than words ever could. The internet didn't react to a quote. They reacted to energy, to body language, to a feeling. And suddenly, one quiet reaction turned into one of the biggest NBA conversations of the entire offseason. Was AJ disappointed? Was he shocked? Was he trying to stay professional? Or did the future #1 pick just accidentally reveal what so many players around the league secretly think about the Wizards organization? Because whether people want to admit it or not, Washington has become one of the most controversial situations in basketball. Years of losing, endless rebuilding, young talent coming and going, fans losing hope season after season. So when the most anticipated prospect in years reacted like that, people noticed, and trust me, things only got stranger after the cameras stopped rolling. Because when AJ finally spoke to reporters after the lottery, his words were calm, careful, and honestly a little terrifying if you read between the lines. What he said next completely changed the conversation around his NBA future. But before we get there, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city and state in the comments, and let's see how global this NBA community really is. And I gotta ask, if you think AJ Dybansa secretly does not want to play for the Wizards, comment 1. If you think people are overreacting and he was just staying composed, comment 2. And if you love intense NBA stories, draft drama, and behind-the-scenes league conversations like this, make sure you subscribe right now, because this story is about to get way bigger than anybody expected. The interview that made everything worse. If NBA fans thought AJ Dybansa's reaction was strange, his interview made it even harder to ignore. This was supposed to be a dream moment. A future #1 pick had just seen his NBA path open in front of him. But AJ didn't sound emotional. He sounded careful. When reporters asked about possibly joining Washington, he didn't say he was excited. He didn't call the Wizards a dream destination. He didn't promise anything. Instead, he calmly said he was versatile, adaptable, and could play with anyone. That answer was professional, but it also felt distant. He talked about his game, his fit, and his ability to adjust. But he never fully embraced Washington, and fans noticed immediately. To some people, it was maturity. AJ knew every word could become a headline, so he stayed neutral. But to others, it sounded like he was leaving the door open. Maybe for a trade, maybe for another team, maybe for a draft night twist nobody sees coming. That is what made the moment so powerful. AJ didn't criticize the Wizards. He didn't create drama on purpose. But by refusing to show strong excitement, he gave the internet just enough space to build the story for him. And in today's NBA, that is all it takes. One pause, one careful answer, one missing sentence. Suddenly, everyone was asking the same question. Was AJ simply being professional, or was he quietly telling the basketball world he wasn't fully sold on Washington? To understand why that question matters so much, you have to understand who AJ Dybansa really is. Because this is not just another talented college player entering the draft. This is a prospect who has been treated like basketball royalty since he was a teenager, the kid who was never supposed to fail. Long before AJ Dybansa became the projected #1 pick in the NBA draft, people were already calling him the future of basketball. Not after college, not after a breakout tournament, not after one viral highlight tape. AJ was on the radar before most players even understood what national attention felt like. Born in Boston and raised in Brockton, Massachusetts, AJ grew up around competition, discipline, and expectation. Basketball became more than a game. It became the path, At Street Sebastian's school, he didn't look like a normal freshman. He looked older, stronger, more polished, and more prepared than almost everyone around him. Scouts noticed fast. Rankings followed. Headlines followed. Then came the pressure. By the time most kids his age were still trying to earn local attention, AJ was already being talked about as the #1 player in his class. That kind of hype can break a young player. Every game becomes a test. Every mistake becomes a headline. Every quiet night becomes a question. But AJ kept moving. He transferred to prolific prep in California, where the competition was tougher, the schedule was national, and the spotlight was even brighter. That move told everyone he wasn't trying to hide from pressure. He was chasing it, and he kept proving himself. Against elite players, in front of scouts, under national attention, AJ didn't shrink. He looked like exactly what people said he was, a future franchise player. Then he made another bold decision. He reclassified. He didn't want to wait. He wanted to reach the NBA faster. He wanted the challenge sooner. And that decision sent a clear message to every front office in the league. AJ Dybansa believed he was ready. That is why his reaction on lottery night mattered so much, because this wasn't just a talented teenager finding out where he might play. This was a player who had been built, hyped, and prepared for greatness, suddenly facing the possibility of beginning his NBA career with one of the most questioned franchises in basketball. And for a player whose entire journey has been aimed at greatness, Washington was never going to feel like just another destination. It was going to feel like a test, maybe the biggest one of his life. The moment AJ proved the hype was real, by the time AJ Dybansa arrived at BYU, the expectations around him were already insane. People weren't asking whether he would make the NBA anymore. They were asking how great he could actually become. Could he be an all-star, a franchise player, the next elite two-way superstar in the league? And once the season started, AJ wasted absolutely no time answering those questions. From the opening weeks, he looked different. Bigger, faster, more controlled. Defenders couldn't stay in front of him, and when they tried to crowd him, he simply shot over them. When teams doubled him, he picked them apart. Night after night, he played like someone who already understood the pace of the professional game. And the scary part, he was still only a freshman. One NBA scout reportedly described watching AJ as seeing a future pro playing against college athletes. That's how advanced his game looked. Then came the performance that really shook the basketball world. Against Utah, AJ exploded for 43 points, breaking the school record for the most points ever scored by a BYU freshman. Every level of scoring was on display. Deep threes, tough finishes through contact, transition attacks, isolation buckets, the entire offensive package. But honestly, the stats weren't even the craziest part. It was the confidence. AJ didn't play like a young player trying to survive under pressure. He played like the best player on the floor, expected to dominate every possession. Then came the game at Madison Square Garden against Clemson. BYU was getting embarrassed early. Down big, momentum completely gone. The crowd losing interest, and then AJ took over. Second half after second half possession, he completely changed the energy of the game. Big shots, defensive stops, fast break finishes. Suddenly, the comeback was real. By the end of the night, AJ had turned one of the worst situations of the season into one of the biggest comeback wins in school history. That was the moment many executives stopped seeing him as just the top prospect. They started seeing him as a future franchise centerpiece. And it wasn't just college basketball anymore. AJ had already built a reputation internationally with Team USA, winning gold medals and dominating against elite young talent from around the world. Coaches praised his maturity. Scouts praised his versatility. Teammates praised his leadership. Everything about his rise started pointing toward the same conclusion. This was not normal hype. AJ Dybansa genuinely looked like the type of player organizations spend decades searching for. A modern NBA wing with size, athleticism, scoring ability, defensive intensity, and superstar confidence. That's why lottery night felt so strange. Because when a player this talented reacts coldly to your franchise winning the #1 pick, people start asking difficult questions, not about the player, about the organization. And that's exactly where this story starts getting uncomfortable for the Washington Wizards. Because the internet's reaction to AJ's face didn't come from nowhere, it came from years of frustration, disappointment, and one reputation the Wizards still haven't escaped. A reputation that many NBA fans believe can destroy even the brightest young stars. The franchise nobody wanted him to land in. The second the Washington Wizards won the draft lottery, NBA fans reacted like something terrible had just happened. And honestly, that reaction didn't come out of nowhere. Because over the last decade, the Wizards have built one of the worst reputations in basketball, not just for losing, but for going nowhere. Year after year, the franchise kept getting stuck in the same cycle. New rebuilds, new young players, new promises, and somehow the same disappointing results. At some point, fans stopped looking at Washington as a team trying to rise. They started looking at it as basketball quicksand, a place where talent disappears. That's why AJ Dybansa's reaction instantly became such a massive story. People weren't just reacting to his face. They were reacting to what Washington represents in the minds of NBA fans. And statistically, the situation looks brutal. The Wizards finished the season with the worst record in basketball. Even worse, they became the first team in NBA history to lose at least 64 games in 3 straight seasons. Think about how insane that sounds. 3 consecutive years of historic losing, that's not bad luck anymore. That becomes identity. And once a franchise gets that label, it becomes incredibly difficult to escape it. Fans online immediately started bringing up the organization's history with top picks. John Wall gave the city hope, but injuries eventually destroyed that era. Before him, Kwame Brown became one of the most criticized #1 picks the league has ever seen. Even when Washington had talented rosters, they rarely looked like true championship threats. And over time, NBA fans developed a belief that no matter how much talent arrives there, something always goes wrong. That's the shadow hanging over this draft. Because AJ Dybansa isn't entering the league as a normal rookie. He's entering with expectations of becoming a superstar capable of changing a franchise. The problem? Washington has spent years looking like a franchise that can't even change itself. And that's where the fear starts. Not fear that AJ will fail because of talent. Fear that the environment around him could slow everything down. Young players need stability, leadership, structure, winning habits. For years, critics have argued the Wizards haven't consistently provided any of those things. That's why social media exploded after the lottery. Fans weren't saying AJ lacked greatness. They were asking whether greatness could actually survive in Washington. And honestly, when you look at the franchise's recent history, it's hard to completely dismiss that concern. But here's where the story takes a surprising turn. Because while the internet was busy turning the Wizards into a joke, something very important was happening behind the scenes. Washington quietly started changing everything. And if people aren't paying attention carefully enough, they might completely miss what this team is trying to become. The twist nobody saw coming. But what if the internet got this completely wrong? What if AJ Dybansa's reaction wasn't the beginning of a basketball disaster, but the start of something nobody expected? Because while NBA fans were busy clowning the Wizards online, Washington's front office was quietly building something far more dangerous than people realized. And honestly, the roster suddenly looks a lot more serious than the memes suggest. That's what makes this story so complicated. For years, the Wizards looked directionless. A franchise trapped between rebuilding and mediocrity, never fully committing to either one. But over the last year, something changed. Aggressively. First came the Trae Young move. And whether fans want to admit it or not, stealing a 27-year-old all-star level point guard is not the type of move hopeless franchises usually pull off. Trae instantly changes the offense. Spacing, tempo, shot creation, pressure on defenses. Suddenly, Washington has a real playmaker capable of making everyone around him better. Then came the bigger shot, Anthony Davis. One of the most respected defenders of his generation suddenly landed in Washington, giving the Wizards something they haven't had in years, real star power. Now imagine that for a second. Trae Young running the offense, Anthony Davis protecting the paint, Alex Sarr developing beside them, young athletic wings everywhere, and possibly AJ Dybansa entering that situation as the final centerpiece. That doesn't sound like a dead franchise anymore. That sounds like a team trying to skip years of rebuilding overnight. And that's why some people around the league are quietly changing their opinion on Washington. Because beneath all the losing, tanking accusations, and internet jokes, the Wizards may have been setting up this moment for a long time. A young superstar, veteran stars, athletic defenders, future draft assets. Suddenly, the picture starts looking very different. In fact, some analysts now believe AJ could walk into a surprisingly good basketball situation if the roster stays healthy. Trae Young creates offense at an elite level. Anthony Davis covers defensive mistakes. Alex Sarr continues growing as one of the league's most promising young bigs. And AJ? He wouldn't need to carry the franchise alone from day one. That matters more than people realize. A lot of young stars fail because organizations ask them to become saviors immediately. Every loss becomes their fault. Every struggle becomes a national headline. But if Washington truly built this correctly, AJ could develop inside a structure that actually helps him grow instead of crushing him under impossible expectation. That's the twist nobody online wanted to talk about. Because hating the Wizards became easy. Laughing at the Wizards became normal. But rebuilding narratives can change very fast in the NBA. One superstar changes everything. One successful season changes perception. One deep playoff run changes an entire franchise reputation. And maybe, just maybe, Washington believes AJ Dybansa is the player capable of changing all of it. But there's still one massive problem. Because while the Wizards were building this new vision behind the scenes, a lot of people around the league started questioning how they got here in the first place. And that's where the story starts getting controversial again. The tanking question nobody wants to talk about. Just when people started believing the Wizards might finally have a real plan, another problem appeared, and this one made the entire league uncomfortable. Because many fans, and even people inside the NBA, started questioning whether Washington manipulated the season to reach this exact moment. Think about it. The Wizards traded for Trae Young. They added Anthony Davis, two legitimate star players. But somehow, the team still finished with one of the worst records in basketball. Why? Because neither star played consistent. Young players were benched late in games, veterans sat out, losses piled up fast. At one point, Washington lost 26 of their final 27 games. That's when the accusations started. Fans believed the Wizards weren't simply rebuilding anymore. They were openly tanking for AJ Dybansa, and honestly, the timing looks suspicious. The moment a generational prospect appeared in the draft class, Washington suddenly collapsed to the bottom of the standings and secured the number 1 pick. The NBA reportedly noticed too. League executives began discussing whether teams were becoming too aggressive with modern tanking strategies. Around the league, there was frustration about teams trading for stars, barely using them, and prioritizing draft position over competition. That's what makes AJ's situation so complicated, because now he isn't just walking into a rebuilding franchise. He's walking into a franchise people are actively debating. Some fans believe the Wizards played the long game perfectly. Others believe the organization created a losing culture that could become dangerous for young players. And for AJ Dybansa, that pressure starts immediately. If Washington wins, people will call the rebuild genius. If they fail, people will say the entire plan was built on losing from the beginning. That's a massive burden to place on a 9-year-old prospect before he even plays his first NBA game. But the strangest part, the draft still isn't guaranteed to go the way everyone expects. Because behind the scenes, there are already whispers that Washington may not be fully committed to selecting AJ at all. The draft night nobody can predict. For weeks, NBA fans have acted like AJ Dybansa to Washington is already official. But inside league circles, things are nowhere near that simple. Yes, AJ is still viewed by many scouts as the favorite to go number 1 overall. His size, scoring ability, athleticism, and two-way potential make him one of the most valuable young prospects in basketball. But this draft class is loaded, and that changes everything. Darren Peterson continues rising on draft boards. Cameron Boozer has supporters all around the league. Caleb Wilson keeps drawing attention from executives who believe his upside is being underestimated. Some front offices reportedly believe the gap between the top prospects is much smaller than the public thinks. And once teams start believing that, trade conversations become very real. That's why rumors around Washington have become so fascinating. Instead of treating the number 1 pick like an automatic decision, the Wizards are reportedly evaluating every possible option. Keep the pick, trade down, add assets, build for the future differently. And honestly, that should terrify the rest of the league, because holding the number 1 pick gives Washington total control over the draft. They can select AJ, they can move the pick, they can reshape the entire top of the board overnight. Now imagine the chaos if that happened. Imagine AJ suddenly landing somewhere else. Imagine another franchise aggressively trading up. Imagine the Wizards passing on the player everyone expected them to take. The reaction would be insane. And quietly, some teams are already watching the situation closely. The Utah Jazz, holding another top selection, have been connected to AJ in multiple conversations. Around the league, there's growing belief that Utah would love the chance to build around a dynamic young scorer like Dybansa if an opportunity appeared. That possibility matters, because for all the attention surrounding AJ's reaction to Washington, there's still a real chance he never plays a single game there. And honestly, that may be part of the reason he stayed so careful during lottery. No emotional commitment, no promises. No dramatic statements, just calm professionalism from a player who understands the business side of the NBA better than most veterans. AJ knows the truth. Nothing is final yet. Not the pick, not the team, not the future. And until draft night officially arrives, every reaction, every rumor, and every interview will continue feeding one massive question hanging over the entire NBA. Where does AJ Dybansa actually want to begin his career? The real message behind AJ's silence. At the center of this entire story was still that one quiet reaction, that nod. The moment millions of NBA fans instantly tried to turn into a message. But maybe the real meaning behind AJ Dybansa's reaction was never anger, frustration, or disappointment. Maybe it was control. Because the more this story developed, the more obvious it became that AJ understood something most young prospects do not. Every second matters once you become the future face of the league. One facial expression becomes a headline. One sentence becomes a debate. One awkward pause becomes national drama. And AJ seemed fully aware of that from the very beginning. That's why his reaction felt so different. He never celebrated too hard. He never looked devastated. He never gave people a direct answer they could attack. Instead, he stayed composed, almost like a veteran superstar protecting his image before his career had even started. And honestly, that level of awareness at 19 years old is rare. Most players entering the NBA still act like teenagers emotionally. AJ already carries himself like someone preparing for the pressure of being a franchise centerpiece. That's why some people around the league actually respected his reaction. To them, AJ wasn't acting cold. He was acting smart, because whether he ends up in Washington or somewhere else, he knows the expectations around him are enormous. He knows people expect him to become great immediately. He knows fans are already trying to define his career before draft night even arrived. So instead of feeding the noise, he gave the world nothing. And somehow, that became louder than any statement he could have made. The internet wanted emotion. Age gave discipline. The internet wanted drama. AJ gave control. The internet wanted a headline. AJ gave ambiguity. And maybe that was the real message all along. Not, I don't want the Wizards, but my future belongs to me. Because deep down, AJ Dybansa probably understands something every great player eventually learned. Franchises do not define superstars forever. Superstars eventually define franchises. And if AJ truly becomes the player many scouts believe he can become, then one awkward draft lottery reaction won't matter years from now. Winning will, development will, leadership will. The only question left now is whether the Washington Wizards are truly ready for the pressure that comes with drafting a player carrying expectations this massive. Savior, superstar, or another warning sign. In the end, this entire story started with something incredibly small. One reaction, one expression, one quiet nod on draft lottery night. But somehow, that tiny moment opened a much bigger conversation about pressure, expectations, and the future of one of the NBA's most important young players. Because AJ Dybansa is no longer just a basketball prospect, he is now a symbol of possibility. For the Wizards, he can become the player who finally changes everything. The superstar capable of dragging the franchise out of years of losing and giving fans real hope again. But history has shown something important. Talent alone is never enough. Not in the NBA, not in professional sports, not under this level of pressure. Young stars need structure. They need leadership. They need patience. And most importantly, they need organizations that know how to protect growth instead of rushing greatness. That is the real challenge waiting for Washington. Not drafting AJ, developing him correctly. Because if the Wizards make the wrong decisions, the criticism will become ruthless. Every loss will be blamed on the franchise. Every bad stretch will become national headline. Every comparison to other young stars will create even more pressure around AJ's future. But if they get this right, everything changes. One successful season can rewrite a franchise reputation. One superstar can completely transform a city's basketball culture. One winning era can erase years of failure. And maybe that's why this story matters so much to NBA fans. Not because AJ made a dramatic statement, but because everyone understands what's truly at stake here. A generational talent, a rebuilding franchise, massive expectation, and a future nobody can predict yet. That's what makes sports powerful. Sometimes the biggest moments are not championships or buzzer beaters. Sometimes they're silent reactions that reveal how much pressure exists before the journey even begins. Now the basketball world waits for draft night. Will AJ Dybansa become the face of the Washington Wizards? Will the franchise finally escape years of disappointment? Or will this become another example of how difficult it is to turn talent into winning? We're about to find out. But now I want to hear from you. Do you believe AJ Dybansa can truly change the Wizards franchise? Comment 1 if you believe he becomes a superstar in Washington. Comment 2 if you think another team would be better for his future. And if you enjoyed this deep NBA breakdown, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with another basketball fan who's been following the AJ Dybansa story. Because, trust me, the NBA world is going to be talking about this for a very long time.